when things go really spectacularly wrong and all you want to do is panic and run around with your hair on fire along with anyone else, when you're the leader, you have to be inauthentic, you have to take a few deep breaths, and you have to be the rock and the stability around which the solution will grow.
Hello everyone. The bar is placed very high today. We're going to discuss leadership, tradition, skills, craftsmanship and sustainability. Not so fashionable qualities to some nowadays. And I'll be looking at these characteristics through the lens of a very distinguished, in fact a royal institution, and a very distinguished Royal Marines officer. We're here in the very sunny Warwick Hotel in Geneva. My guest today is General Sir Gordon Messenger, who is a trustee of the King's Foundation in the UK. And he's here in Geneva to address the British-Swiss Chamber of Commerce. It's after lunch. The members and guests have gone, and my guest is able to relax and spend some time with me before he travels on to Zurich. Welcome back to Geneva, General Messenger. May I call you Gordon?
Of course.
Thanks. I said welcome back because you once mentioned to me that you are no stranger here. And before we start talking about the King's Foundation, please tell me and the listeners about your experiences of Geneva and Switzerland.
Yes, well, I was very fortunate. My family were very fortunate. In 2003-04, we spent a year here whilst I was on a course at the Geneva Centre for Security Policy.
I know it well.
And we lived in Coppet, and my children went to local school, and we made the most of Switzerland and the Lac Le Mans area. It was a fabulous year for the family.
So it's 2 minutes from where I live. I live in Fune. Okay. Wonderful, wonderful. Gordon, please tell me and our listeners a little of the provenance of the King's Foundation. I'm sure many do not know about it.
So the King's Foundation was formed by then Prince Charles in 1990. So it celebrated its 35th birthday this year. And it's founded upon his vision of harmony. He co-authored a book about this in 2010, and I'm delighted to say that there is a film about it on release next January, which will give your listeners all the detail they might need to know and a lot of the colour. But essentially it is a philosophy of the human beings working with the weft and weave of nature rather than acting upon it, imposing themselves upon it, and seeing themselves as separate to it. The King calls it a crisis of perception. He says that we too often as a human race view ourselves as separate from or even above what goes on in nature and the broader ecosystems of the world. And what we have to do is to think about how we can integrate, how we can be part of it, how we can be sympathetic, how we can gain benefit by working with the natural processes of nature.
And this is not to be confused with the Prince's Trust, as was.
So the now King's Trust is a separate charity which is focused on development of young people, and we work closely with them, but we are separate charities.
I see, okay. So the King's Foundation is known for championing sustainability, rooted in traditional skills, local materials, as you said, but what does sustainability really mean in the context of heritage, placemaking, interesting phrase, community regeneration? After all, sustainability is quite an overworked word these days.
I think it risks being so. It tends to sort of be viewed in the context of carbon targets and net zero, when it means so much more than that. And the concept of harmony very much plays on the circularity of life, the fact that things are born or grow and then go through a life cycle and give back to the very ecosystem that they took from through their life, be that flora or fauna, humans or animals. And I think that's what sustainability is like, leaving as little a footprint as one can that is disruptive, and working together with all the components of nature to deliver a more sustainable future. So you're right to highlight communities. You're right to highlight heritage and the use of natural materials. These are all things that are very much at the heart of the broader view of sustainability.
Many organisations, Gordon, struggle, as you know, with short-termism. You mentioned this in your speech earlier today. What lessons from the Foundation's projects demonstrate the value of taking the long-term, quality-driven approach? Can you give me some examples?
Yes, there are lots of examples. I think if one were to take a really sort of logical economic perspective, actually it can be shown that delivering quality that lasts, endures for many, many years, if not lifetimes, is actually a more economically viable and sustainable way to approach the delivery of products and services. But of course, we live in a world where people are attracted to cheap and cheerful. They're attracted to fast turnover items, wear them once and then get rid of them. And that ultimately is less sustainable from an economic perspective. It's certainly less sustainable from an environmental perspective. A great example of this is the work that the King's Foundation are championing on the built environment. The built environment, essentially the communities that we live in. And you can compare a traditional building approach to estates that are popping up on the outskirts of cities and towns around the UK, whereby the quality is not particularly high, but they're mass produced and relatively cheap. If we compare that to an approach which is being championed by the Foundation in places such as Poundbury near Dorchester, this is quality accommodation, including affordable accommodation, which has made from high value materials. It has the fact that this is a community built into the architecture and the design. It has the ability to live, to work, to earn, to shop, to get one's basic services all within walkable distances. And it is absolutely proven that in the long term that is economically viable. So at the Foundation, we're great supporters in delivering quality that endures.
But if there is a greater emphasis on craftsmanship and skill, and at the same time we have this short-termism and short attention span, isn't that a difficult balance to be struck, particularly for younger people? And I just wonder how you, as older people who are in a way nursing people through it, young people I'm talking about, how do you do that?
Yeah, I think what I detect in young people is a very strong values base and a very strong interest in the future of their planet. So a lot of what the King's Foundation pushes, a lot of what the King's Foundation supports, plays very strongly into young people's agendas. And you're right that buying, cheap and cheerful fashion is perhaps the domain of the younger, but they certainly buy into this notion that we need to protect our planet. We need to work with nature, and as a foundation, we have a lot of young people on apprentice schemes. We are training them in those more traditional crafts to ensure that the delivery of the products at the right level of quality and with the right raw materials will endure beyond us.
And in this sort of fast and convenient world that we're living in, and we're bringing up our grandchildren into, do you think that the definition in their own minds of quality is dramatically different from ours? I mean, how do they see quality, and to what extent does quality mean something significant to them?
I wouldn't differentiate generationally on that. I mean, to me, quality speaks for itself. You know when you're around it. You know when you're getting quality service. You know when you're experiencing a quality product, be that a building, be that a meal, be that good online banking support. This is a sort of emphasis on excellence, good customer service, and providing what people want. I think that's something that transcends generations and speaks for itself.
I'm fascinated. My guest today is General Sir Gordon Messenger. He's a trustee of the King's Foundation in the UK, whose founder was King Charles III when he was the Prince of Wales. Now, Gordon, you've led at the highest levels, and this interests me in particular, the leadership aspect. You've led at the highest levels in both the military and public service. What's the values-based leadership, and which aspects of values-based leadership translate most effectively to the mission and the culture of the King's Foundation?
I've always felt that the role of a leader in whatever field is to create a strong team around a common purpose. And leaders who feel it's about them and their qualities, I think, can get things wrong. I think leaders who recognise it is about the impact that they have on others that defines their leadership credentials are the best leaders, in my view. And this concept of building a team, building a community around a common purpose is right at the heart of what the King's Foundation is trying to do. If you go to Dumfries House in Scotland, which is the headquarters and really the flagship of the charity, what you see there are workers in all professions: farming, textiles, stonemasonry, hospitality, gardening, all pulling together around a single endeavour, and that is to make the Dumfries House and its environment a good place to visit, a good place to learn, and a good place to promote sustainability. And I think it's getting that teamwork community around a common purpose. If you achieve that as a leader, then frankly, your job becomes very easy.
Okay. Oftentimes when people like you, who have lots of experience, say it makes it very easy. It's like talking to an iceberg where you only see what's above the surface of the water. I want to ask you now a much more penetrating question, I hope. In your experience, what is the most important thing that leaders can do to build trust? I just want some examples, whether in the armed forces, government, or community-focused charity like the Foundation. Give me some examples. I mean, for example, training as an officer and going to the high rank of general, what is it that you're taught, apart from what you learn by experience, about leading men and women?
Well, I think that in the military, we're in many ways fortunate that leadership is a defining principle throughout the profession, and that people recognise that leadership matters. People recognise what it means to lead and what it means to be led. And one of my experiences since leaving is that is by no means a universal workforce culture beyond the military. But I do think that the qualities of good leaders are universal regardless of what you do. I think at the top of that list, I would definitely pick out authenticity. I think if you are trying to be something you're not, if you're essentially acting, or you're not being honest with the people that you're leading, I think that very quickly gets found out. And I think being authentic, being true to yourself, but also being honest with those you lead is really important. There is a caveat to that, actually, Michael, which is when things go really spectacularly wrong, and all you want to do is panic and run around with your hair on fire along with anyone else. When you're the leader, you have to be inauthentic. You have to take a few deep breaths, and you have to be the rock and the stability around which the solution will grow. And I've always found that the hardest bit of leadership.
In the military, are you taught that by exercises and by experience and by the practical nature of what you do? I tell you why I ask you that question, because not to compare the two professions, but I started life as a teacher back in the late 60s. And one of the things I was taught is that I was teaching sports and physical education, other English and history, but mainly a sports teacher. And the thing that I was taught then was never to lose your temper in front of the boys, because it was a boys' schools mainly I was teaching in. but no harm in sometimes giving the impression that you lost your cool, just to pull them back in line if someone had overstepped it. Yeah. Now, can that translate into the military? Or was it not so? Was that too
I would certainly
too trite and facile?
It's not trite and facile. I certainly wouldn't lose my temper, because if you lose your temper, you lose your judgment, and so one has to retain judgment. I have never personally pretended to lose my temper. What I have had to do on occasions when something really quite bad has happened, is happening, is really calm myself down, because when the unexpected happens or something unpleasant happens, people look to the leader,
of course,
and expect a
they
response.
Watch you very closely, yeah?
And you have to be the sort of the solidity around which the solution will grow.
Tell me a little bit about Dumfries House and the foundation's work and there, and whether, because you used the phrase holistic regeneration, do other organizations come to you to learn from you, to look at what you're doing, to quiz you on how you gain success?
Yes, we've got a lot of external interest. We work very closely with the local council. We work very closely with local health professionals on well-being programs and the like. We work very closely with local farm owners, because there's a very strong sort of sustainable farming element to our outputs there. But there's also global interest in what happens, and part of that is, of course, the fact that people are fascinated by the King's vision and they want to come to where it manifests itself most strongly. But actually, there's a great deal of interest around the world, and not in any particular, in the Middle East, in South America, in South Asia, for some of the principles that are being demonstrated at Dumfries House. And I think this is really important, because if the King's Foundation does no more than provide a sort of reasonably geographically limited pocket of excellence, that's great. But what it's not having is that sort of, it's not exporting the value, it's not exporting the concept. So we really welcome sort of friends, partners, and those interested to Dumfries House. Australia most recently have created a King's Foundation in Australia. They've procured a sizable country residence and are looking to deliver a very similar model to Dumfries House.
For the whole of the continent?
No, again, it will be a relatively geographically limited, but what you're doing is you're taking a model of excellence to a different continent, and then you hope that it will export to other parts of Australia.
And is that quite new?
That's relatively new. That's within the last year.
Yeah, okay. No, a quite different question. King Charles and I are the same age. In fact, I'm 8 months older, and my brother's the same age as the Princess Royal. We grew up, so to speak, together with the young royals of the 50s and 60s, and both my parents volunteered to join the British Armed Forces from Jamaica and served in Egypt and England during World War II. They were great supporters of the royal family. All that is a lead into a question you must have expected. What is King Charles like? I've never met him. You've met him. I'm sure our listeners would like to hear your impressions of him too. What is he like?
Well, I certainly wouldn't pretend to know King Charles well. And, when we have conversations, they're good conversations. But I do have the privilege of watching him with others. And I do have the privilege of recognising the passion that he puts into the things he holds most dear. I would say that what you see in his public persona reflects his character. He's a very thoughtful person. He's a very kind person. He has really no natural airs and graces. You see him at his most comfortable when he's wandering the gardens of Highgrove with the head gardener, or he's in conversation with an apprentice at the millinery school. This is when he's most sort of at ease and natural. And I think he's very, very committed to this cause. and puts a great deal of effort and thought into it. And really, it's for us as the foundation to try and take that sort of concept and that vision and try and export it as widely as we can, but also to try and ensure that it endures for decades and decades to come.
So going back to what you said to me before, it sounds like authentic, and authenticity is what comes through from him.
I think very, very clearly, and to the extent that if he's a little bit sort of exasperated about something, he shows he's exasperated about it, not in an unkind way, but in an authentic way. And I think he's human being, and I have an enormous amount of respect for him.
Good. Last question. We finish with the future, young people. When you look at young people going through the Foundation's training programs today, what gives you the most confidence about the next generation of leaders and craftspeople?
So I see them in the King's Foundation programs, but I also, in other parts of my sort of portfolio, have led relatively flat teams where I engage, day to day, hour by hour, with I don't know what generation it's called, but 20-somethings. And I've always been really sort of encouraged by what I have seen. And despite the sort of slightly lazy universal statements about how the youth today isn't what it used to be, actually
Which every
generation does. But I think this generation is different than certainly when I was that age. It's more values based, probably less patriotic in sort of national terms, but sees the key environmental issues of today as a very high priority. So in terms of that generation's ability to interact with each other, I think there are certain values there that they stand by. In terms of our relationship with the planet, there are certain values that they stand by. And I've been really quite struck by how impressive they are. Sometimes they might need a little bit of sort of leadership. That's not to be surprised at their stage. But I do find them a wholly hopeful generation, not just for them, but I see hope in the way that they approach their life ahead.
Well, that's encouraging, and you're not the first person to have said that. And my children have sort of grown through that generation. I've got another sort of grandchildren generation coming up, and I'm full of optimism.
Me too.
For what's ahead, although they've got some fairly tough decisions to make about the world that we're in. Gordon, thanks a lot for answering all those questions and the insights that you've given me and you've given the listeners. My guest today has been General Sir Gordon Messenger, who's a trustee of the King's Foundation. And Gordon, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the McKay Interview podcast. You can find my show on most of the leading podcast platforms, plus the complete playlist dating back to 2012 can be found by writing The McKay Interview into your browser. Thanks again for listening.